Okay, we're going to get started with our panel on Indigenous research in the Great Lakes region. We have 4 panelists, and I'm just going to introduce everybody right now, and then we can, I think, just flow from one to the next. We're going to be starting off with Sarah Gordon Altiman, who is a member of the Red Cliff Band, and she is the Indigenous Arts and Sciences Outreach Coordinator for the Earth Partnership Program and a doctoral student at University of Wisconsin-Madison. Sarah's research focuses on the process of incorporating Indigenous traditional ecological knowledge into school curriculum of tribal communities. After Sarah, we're going to go to Dr. Marty Reinhart. And got to say, it's great seeing Marty back here. Marty was one of our keynotes for the Food Sovereignty Symposium and Festival here in 2017. And Marty and I then collaborated on an absolutely crazy and insane process to host the Food Sovereignty Symposium and Festival at Northern Michigan University and the Keweenaw Bay Indian community in supposed to be 2021. Delta variant, pandemic, we did a virtual, and then we did the full in-person at Northern Michigan University and Keweenaw Bay. But Marty is a member of the Sault Ste. Marie Band of Chippewa and professor of Native American Studies at Northern Michigan University. His work includes multiple projects centering on Indigenous foods in the Great Lakes region. Then we're going to move to Rebecca Edler, who's the sustainability coordinator at the Sustainable Development Institute of College of Menominee Nation. And the Institute leads Indigenous research, leads all research at the College of Menominee Nation. Really excited, and I think it's a great pairing of Rebecca and Bill Gartner is a lecturer and principal investigator in the Department of Geography at UW-Madison, working with the Menominee Nation, studying the history of ancestral Menominee-raised field systems. I myself work very closely with Menominee. Somewhere in here, I had seen Jen earlier. Jen Falk back there works with Menominee's Department of Agriculture and Food Systems, and it's pretty cool just to see the connection of some of that, of the history and then of everything that's happening today. So I think we've got a really great sequence of panelists here, and we'll have time for questions and discussion at the end. Sarah, we'll kick it off with you.
Buju Gakanawia, Indigena Kaz Nigano Sekwe, Indudem Wabisheshe, Indunjaba, Minawaki, Minawa, Misquabikong. So what I just said is my name in my language is Walks in the Front Woman. I'm from the Martin clan, and I'm from the city of Milwaukee via the Red Cliff Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa. So we're going to talk today about our project, which I'm really, really proud of, and I'm really grateful to be able to be here today to talk about it. It is called Deepening Indigenous STEM. So we have an intertribal research team. We have partners in 5 tribal communities in the state of Wisconsin, the Ho-Chunk Nation. I wanted to give credit to all of our team members because I am not the lead person on this. I'm just one aspect of an amazingly dynamic group of people who is doing this work. Jared Blanche from the Red Cliff Band, myself, and Jesse Conaway are the main leads for the Red Cliff Band. All the groups that you see here are doing the same work that we're doing, but in their own communities. So the research methods you have here, it's TDPR, which is tribally driven participatory research. The work that we're actually doing is the development of tribally led curriculum. So each community was approached, asked what it was that they wanted to see happen in their communities. The development of this sort of lesson plan grouping was what most groups wanted to see. We did individual listening sessions in each community in order to develop guiding questions that would lead our process. So for Red Cliff, the way that it started was April 2021. We had lesson plan development begins based on guiding principles defined by Red Cliff Band members who were part of those listening sessions. What they decided they wanted to see in this curriculum that would be developed for the community would be that they include language, land-based education knowledge, traditional ecological knowledge, local history, and traditional ecological knowledge and science. A big part of what was one of the springboards for developing and receiving this grant is that there's a low amount of Native students entering STEM fields, but there's a large amount of tribal land that needs management. And in order to produce those scientists, we need to incorporate traditional ecological knowledge and marry it with Western science to build interest in our students. So a lot of the lessons that I have that I'll discuss in a little while are based around science activities. And naturally, those science activities become related to food sovereignty. So Dr. Sandra Barton has 5 threads of Indigenous education. These are really helpful when developing Indigenous lesson plans because they give an outline that can be moved from tribal community to tribal community, and they are that the lessons need to be place-based, include storytelling, they need to be intergenerational, they need to be experience-based, and they need to focus on interconnectedness. So any number of these components can be present in a lesson plan. Obviously, the more, the better. Sometimes only one is able to be done, but at least that's a move in the right direction. So here I have some images that are going to help me talk about some of the development of these lessons. So what we did was we brought together community members, teachers from the Bayfield School. The Bayfield School District is a very small district composed of an elementary school, a middle school, and a high school. There's approximately 400 students in the entire district, and 90% of them are from the Red Cliff Band. So it's a public school district, but it's dealing with almost entirely tribal students. Recently, the school district superintendent position was given to a Red Cliff tribal member, which has been extremely helpful in moving this indigenization of the school along. So this lesson in particular is nixtamalization of corn. I've heard lots and lots of talk about corn. And one of the reasons that I wanted to teach this lesson to the students was really because with the reservation era, Ojibwe people have had a lack of access to the movement to different land camps necessary to harvest traditional foods. And so things like wild rice are not always as available as they once were. Some lakes are not producing, some rivers are not producing, especially for the Red Cliff Band. Our Raspberry River no longer produces Menominee. So I wanted to encourage the growth of corn with our students. And to do this, I wanted to teach them about its development in Mesoamerica, the word nixtamalization, nixtamal, it comes from Mexico. I spent a number of years in Mexico, which is a really, really corn-dependent community in a very different way than what we see here in the United States, where a lot of times corn is grown as a crop for animal feed. And I wanted to change that in our community, have it as another available food, maybe not the only one, but at something that they could go for when necessary. So we have some Hopi blue flint corn that was given to me by a friend who grows it near Platteville. And we hulled that, went through the process of harvesting our own wood ash and nixtamalizing the corn in our tribal farm kitchen. So you can see some of the students in the picture on the lower right-hand side. She's hulling some of the Hopi flint corn. They learn about the scientific process of this and how observational science worked, how the people in Mesoamerica would have learned how to nixtamalize corn, which is that likely, there's no definitive answer, but it is likely that at some point they were heating their teosinte, which is the original grain, with stones that were really heavily lime-based, and that lime would have removed the hull of the corn, the teosinte, which they realized then made the corn bioavailable. So that means you can't extract the B vitamins out of corn until this process is done. And a lot of people don't know that if you just grind field corn, you can't extract the nutrients out of it in the same way that if it's been nixtamalized. Once this happens, when it's been made into like the pre-hominy state, you can grind it into tortillas and other things. So I talked to the kids about that. We wrote this up as a lesson plan that will be done annually. So this one, this is a squash lesson that I worked on really closely with another Red Cliff tribal member who's also a teacher at the Bayfield schools. And this is about the history of squash. A lot of people don't know that squash was actually domesticated 5,000 years before corn. And this particular variety of squash can get some credit for the University of Wisconsin. These seeds came from there. This is actually called Gete-akusamin, which is the Ojibwe word for it. It means a really old squash. These seeds were saved by the Miami Nation in northern Indiana, and they were given to the University of Wisconsin, where they produced more of the squash and then distributed the seeds to people. And so we had some of those and we grew them, we grew these squash, and this was a 3-step lesson. So the first step of this lesson was teaching the kids how to hand pollinate squash by identifying male and female squash blossoms, pulling the male flowers, hand pollinating the female flowers, and then taking those squash blossoms and eating them like they do in Mexico. And then moving into the harvesting stage of the squash, where you can see this young man up at the top in the middle. That is a squash, a Gete-akusamin that's been cross-pollinated with a plant. We believe it was a pumpkin, but we're not entirely sure. But that was part of their scientific investigation, was to think about what they might see when they opened that up, and then determine what they think it was cross-pollinated with when they did open it. And that was a lesson to encourage and describe the importance of hand pollination when trying to keep the integrity of heirloom variety plants. So then we dehydrated all of these different squash types and preserved them so that we could then have a feast where we made our own tortillas, venison tacos, dried squash soup, and served that to the Red Cliff community. So that way it becomes a project-based lesson where the students become the teachers in the end. And I can tell you, these students were very proud of these squash. I told them to treat them like their relatives and like their babies, and you can see that they're carrying them around, holding them like babies. And he's even sat down with his little baby there. So we really, tried to discuss this relationship with the plants, make it a seasonal, a 4-season lesson with each one of the things. We're not done when we plant, we're not done when we harvest. We always talk about preparation for winter, that all these different beings that we're harvesting need to be saved for the winter. So that goes into another lesson that we did. I don't think I have any photos of it, but also taught them how to dry meat so that it could be preserved for the winter. And we do a pemmican lesson so that it could be preserved for long term. And we talk about the history of pemmican. And the pemmican lesson is really a lesson about historically how influential the tribes were in sustaining the settler populations in this region. Somebody mentioned earlier that there was this thought that we couldn't survive without the technologies and things that were brought in by settler communities, but really it was quite the opposite, that for the first 250 years that settler populations were here, they could not survive without our technologies. And making our kids proud of that and having them have a new understanding of what the reality was, that there was actually wars fought over pemmican because it was the life and death survival of people who were trying to go inland depended on that pemmican that our people made. So these are the lesson plans that we've developed. We've developed 15 in the Red Cliff community. The Ho-Chunk community has developed, I think, 6 or so of their own based around their own tribal traditions. Bad River is developing their own, and all of the lesson plans are the intellectual property of the tribes.
Uju, wabanang meshe kiak yak dijnakas, bawating don jaba, ajajak and dodem, Nishnabe Ojibwe and Dao, meanwhile Irish American, Dao, and Ojiberish and Dao. It's funny. It's really funny in Ojibwe. Okay, so my name is Marty Reinhart, and my family is Anishinaabe Ojibwe and Irish American. That makes me Ojiberish. In case you didn't get that joke in Anishinaabe one, I'm here with my wife, Tina Moses, and she's been out there selling you guys Decolonize It shirts. So I hope you everyone got a shirt and a cookbook. Anyway, I really like having this eagle feather that I drew on the title slide when I do presentations. Because it reminds us, some of you know who Dr. Gregory Kaihete is, very cool dude. He wrote Look to the Mountain, an Ecology of Indigenous Education. And in his book, he reminds us to think the highest thought. And so I always think about that. If we were to think the highest thought about Indigenous food sovereignty, what would that be? What would be our expectation? That should be the standard, right, for everything that we do. So land acknowledgement equals food acknowledgement, right? What is food? What are these things that we think of as food? Are there spirit beings? They're our relatives, are more than human relatives. We have to decentralize ourselves in this process. That image you see, some of you may have read the Atlas of Great Lakes Indian History by Helen Hornbeck Tanner. Helen was my friend late in her life. She actually testified against the tribes in Michigan earlier in her life, in the case over the Michigan Indian tuition waiver. And I told her, Helen, you were dead wrong. And she admitted she was wrong. She said later in life that we did have treaty rights and that we should have won that case because, just like our food, hunting, food, fishing rights, we also have education rights and spiritual rights and recreation rights and every other right that goes with people who live in an area. You can see there, this is a subsistence pattern map. And the major features on here are Menominee, moose. For those of you who are not Anishinaabe speakers, moose is not the plural of moose, it's moosuck. So anyway, now you know. Wawash Keshik, or the deer, Gigawak, the fish, Mondamin, or corn, and Ishkode, Bijiki, or bison. That's our relatives. So, in my work as a professor of Native American Studies at Northern Michigan University, which I'm soon to retire, funny story, someone said, reach higher, Marty. I thought they said, retire, Marty. I've been blessed to work with many brilliant people in the areas of Indigenous food sovereignty, many of whom are here today. I teach about it in my classes, attending gatherings like this one here today, seeing what people are doing, participating in annual food activities like hunting, fishing, gathering, and gardening. Tina and I are going to be putting up a high tunnel soon. First time we've ever had that kind of experience. And I've conducted research projects that focus on the subject, like the 4 shown on this slide. The image on this slide shows the Byron family sugar bush at a time long before I was born, around the turn of the century. And that's 1900, not this recent one, by the way. It's a time when our family still had intact our Anishinaabe. They were all first speakers. They lived on the land, depending primarily on Indigenous foods for the survival of our community, our family. That means a lot to me, to be able to see that connection in my family way back then, because we sure didn't have it by the time I was born. So the Decolonizing Diet Project I have shown up here, some of you guys seen the cookbook out there. We approached this project with 25 research participants. We say participants because subject seems so cold and laboratory focused. It included both Native and non-Native, male and female, older and younger, range of socioeconomic statuses. We had a great diversity within our population. Between tribes, we had 2 vegetarians, 2 moms who were breastfeeding their babies during the project implementation. Participants committed to eating Indigenous foods from the Great Lakes region as 25 to 100% of their daily diet, increasing their exercise getting regular health checks, and keeping records of their experience. We had native pre-colonial and introduced pre-colonial foods and their derivations that were included as eligible foods during that project year. We did not include anything that was colonial or as GMO or frankenfoods. We developed a master food list and helped people learn how to discern eligible foods in the marketplace and out in nature. The highest commitment requires giving up things like cheese, tomatoes, beer, chocolate, and yes, it's true, DDPers tried to eat tree bark and grasshoppers and other stuff that seems very abnormal to most people's diets. But those were important for us to reestablish connections with. There's a lot of foods that aren't so strange, and I'll talk about more of those as we go along through the other projects as well. Many of the beans that we're familiar with were included. Venison, bison, many things that people have talked about here already today. Three Sisters. Based on a statistical analysis of our group data at the end of that project year, we were able to report that the research participants experienced significant reductions in weight. So we hit on obesity, reductions in girth, and I know John was talking earlier about BMI. We had significant reductions in BMI. Individuals also experienced noteworthy or significant reductions in blood pressure, in cholesterol, bad cholesterol, and in blood glucose levels. What are the three primary killers of Indigenous people here in the United States and Canada? Obesity, diabetes, and heart disease. We hit on all three of them significantly. That's pretty cool. On a sociocultural level, we found that family and community support were very significant. That transformation of space to accommodate our decolonized food needs was required. The time commitment was a major source of anxiety for people. It takes time. It is slow food. But if we're going to want to live that way, it's a sacrifice that we have to make, right? And look at the great impact it can have on us. We had a real small impact on local markets, but a large impact for certain businesses. We had a fish place in Marquette that we asked them to smoke the fish without any other byproducts, just use maple wood and smoke it and let us come get it. We had the Marquette Food Co-op who, they listened to us when we would go down there. We'd say, hey, we'd like anything you can find on this list, duck eggs, corn noodles, whatever. We just want these really good Indigenous products. No one else has them in this town. Can you please get them? And they did. They really were nice. And they continue to do it today, which is really cool. We started the project with 10 Native research subjects and 15 non-Native research subjects. We finished with 12 Native and 7 non-Native. They were yummy. We ate them. It was the only colonized food that we ate. I'm just kidding, by the way. We did not eat the colonial people. We just had folks who decided that they couldn't stay on the project for whatever reason. Then we had some people opt in up to the 6-month mark. So we had a difference in limits and seasons and other rules between tribes because we had people from multiple tribes. We had difference in seasons between tribal and non-tribal because of the state and federal rules. We had potlucks on our campus were not allowed. So we had to go off campus. Folks, how strange is that, right? And I know we're on a campus here today, but we're on a campus, an approved project by our campus, and they wouldn't let us eat food on our campus. It was just very strange. So anyway, we just went across the street and had food in the basement of some church. No big deal. Okay, based on the Decolonizing Diet Project and the legal political ramifications about invoking our treaty rights, it really begged me then to look into treaty rights for food for all tribes and then break that down for my tribe as well. So, it's important that we think first of all about our treaty rights as also treaty responsibilities. If we go way back into Anishinaabe thought, we find that we have treaties with the plants and animals. Barrows, I'm going to borrow this from Barrows. I always like to say that. Anyway, Barrows says that we had this, what I like to call Treaty of Jawenjige. Jawengige. It means they take pity on us. The plants and animals take pity on us. They nourish us so that then our part in that relationship is we protect them and we only take what we need. We invoke the honorable harvest, as many of you have heard Dr. Robin Wall Kimmerer talk about. So that's what I think of in that treaty relationship. It's important that we remember that treaty as we think about the other treaties that we made. We made treaties with other tribes. The one you see on here, that wampum, the treaty, One Dish, One Spoon, between Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee. That's so cool. That food is like the center of a treaty between people, right? And so Tina and I, we were over visiting our daughter when she was going to school in Syracuse, New York, and her professor, Neil Patterson, some of you guys may know Neil. He said, "Marty, you guys come down to lunch after your presentation here. I made a special meal for us." So we went down the hallway and he made beaver tail soup. And I had never had beaver tail soup. And I was like, well, that's interesting. It tasted good, a little texture, you know, it was different. Kind of like mushrooms. For you guys who don't like mushrooms, you know what I'm talking about. I like mushrooms. But anyway, it was just really cool to eat that. He said, "Marty, do you know what this represents?" And I was like, "No, what are you talking about?" "This is the meal that our ancestors ate at that treaty." I was like, "Dude, that's cool," right? He's been one of my favorite guys now ever since. So we also had treaties with nations before the United States and Canada. You know, our Anishinaabe people, we had a treaty with Great Britain, and that is the foundational treaty of our treaty with the United States and Canada. So we have to remember that this is not one treaty, it's many treaties over many years that we are still having to honor. They're still alive. We feast our treaties, right? These are living beings. So that's really important. So we also did this Indigenous Foods TEK in the Great Lakes region, a traditional ecological knowledge study. You can see in the photos here that we went out leek harvesting with Amy Creedon and Leora Lancaster. We cooked fish and made tea with Greg Johnson and Mary Moose. We cooked beaver stew with Daisy Costas, foraged plants and medicine plants with Monica Cady. We attended the Red Lake Nation Food Summit and Food Sovereignty Initiatives with Michael Van Horn and David Manuel. We processed wild rice with Don and Carlene Chosa. We picked berries with Tina's sister, Karen Moses. Processed Oneida white corn with Laura Manthe and Robin Johns here today. We speared fish by torchlight with Greg Johnson in Boise, Levon Valier. That was really cool. We didn't get any fish that night, but it was just cool to see it, right? Spearfishing by torchlight. Harvested dogbane with Robin Wall Kimmerer. Attended the Haudenosaunee Food Sovereignty Initiatives with Angela Ferguson and Roger Cook, who were mentioned earlier. We went to the Sugar Bush with Jerry Jondro and Katie Brissett. We made fish powder with Mary Moose. And then finally, we ran into Dan and Sean Sherman and Kevin Finney at the Great Lakes Intertribal Food Summit, which wrapped up our study. That was the end of our year. We learned a lot that year. Just visiting friends is what we like to think of it as. But we asked all of our friends 3 common questions. And right now, because of COVID and other responsibilities, we haven't finished writing all those visits up in a book, which we intend to. But we asked them 3 common questions. How did you learn what you learn about traditional foods? How do you use that on an annual basis when you know, yearly? And then how do you share it with others? That was some great conversations we had. I was just saying to Laura earlier when we visited her at Oneida, one of the things that really struck Tina and I is how she said every single ear of corn that they harvest has been planted and touched by human hands. You know, think about that. As compared to then we looked across the field at this other farm where the corn never has been touched by human hands. It was a striking difference. Okay, lastly, the Great Lakes Indigenous Materials Poop Study. Yes, I said poop. So, you know, it's also called glimpse. Get a little glimpse of a poop study here. We worked with students in my classes to identify references to Indigenous poop. You know, we kept going to the Indigenous Farming Conference and other things, and I kept asking people, have you ever read anything about indigenous poop? And no one ever seemed to have any answers, right? So I was like, okay, I'm doing this. So I worked with my students to identify what was out there about indigenous poop in the literature from the Great Lakes region. And what we found is that there wasn't a whole lot out there. Most of the studies are outside the Great Lakes region, and that's because we're humid here. We have a lot of moisture in our air. And because of that, the studies are mostly about coprolites or petrified pieces of poop, often found in caves and often outside, in the water. We find that there's these things called stanols. Stanols are these chemical traces of poop that they can tell there's been people here and this is what they've been eating. So between the petrified pieces of poop and the stanols, it was really interesting. The closest we could get was the Mammoth Caves down in Kentucky, where they have found some coprolites. What's really interesting is when they destroyed those coprolites and did an analysis of them, chemical, and looked at them under microscopes, they found a lot of the plants and animals that we had already identified on the Decolonizing Diet Project. So it kind of verified, again, you see where traditional knowledge verifies Western scientific knowledge and vice versa. So I think that was pretty cool. I also interviewed Mary Moose. You can see her laughing there in the middle. She was in the car with her son driving down the road as we were talking about poop, and she just had a blast with that. She was really laughing her ass off. And also Kathleen Meyer. Kathleen Meyer is a non-native person, but she is the author of How to Shit in the Woods. So I thought it was very important. She's like the shit guru of the world. So anyway, I interviewed Kathleen, and she's married to an Anishinaabe man, so it was interesting to get her take on it. The other thing that we did is I did a quasi-experimental study. I went out and I pooped in the woods. We set up a place for me to go poop, and I used different materials from the Great Lakes region to wipe. And then I recorded field notes from my quasi-experimental study. Tina said, yeah, you're on your own with that one. So the long and short of it, Mary Moose had just suggested sphagnum moss, which is what she used growing up for wiping. And the method that she used was just leave it on the ground. The animals come take care of it, hang the sphagnum moss after you use it in a tree, you can reuse it, and then it all goes back to nature. Really a good thing to know. The other thing is that I used corn leaves. We talked a lot about corn here today. I used corn husk leaves, and if you're ever interested in the math of this, I'll let you know. It's kind of cool. But if the average person, and I'm not saying this is you might not be average, you might be above average, right? Takes 3 craps a day, right? So if you eat 3 pieces of corn a day, each piece of corn has an average of 6 to 8 leaves. If you use those leaves, if you dry them out and you use those, there's striations on corn leaves that go like this. If you use it sideways, guess what? It can really wipe a lot of poop off your butt. And if you get them wet, it's like using wet wipes. So, hey, corn leaves, sphagnum moss, good to go. Miigwech, thank you.
My kids would say TMI. So Poso Natanawe Makanak, that's hello, all of my relatives. My name is Rebecca Edler. I am what's called, actually I was sitting up here thinking a very colonized thought. I'm a first line descendant of the Menominee Indian tribe of Wisconsin. My mother is an enrolled Menominee, and my dad identified as being an American. He said I'm of German descent because his grandparents immigrated to the United States from Germany. My dad was in the United States Army and fought in the Korean War, which he was very proud of. I live on the Menominee Indian Reservation. I have 4 adult children and some really cute grandchildren. So welcome to my presentation. Again, I'm from the College of Menominee Nation. I don't know if there's any other Menominees here today. Might be oh, there you go. All right, Poso. So this is our college logo, which represents our 5 clans: eagle, moose, crane, wolf, and bear. And the Menominees also have many subclans. So the College of Menominee Nation is one of the 35 tribal colleges in the United States. It was founded in 1993 as a land-grant institution to provide equity and education for reservation communities. Their intent is to improve the lives and career opportunities for Native students and the communities at large. We just celebrated 30 years. And so I've worked there at the college now for 15 years and at the Sustainable Development Institute for 15. So this is the Sustainable Development Institute. I always like to show a picture of it, so when you come and visit, you know what building to stop in at. So this is where we work. We are considered the research arm of the college because pretty much everyone doing research at the college is done through the Institute. So I'm going to provide you with a little bit of the history as to, because I think it helps you gain a better understanding of how we do our research and the projects that we select. So here we're looking at treaty era. So between 1808 and 1854, there were more than 70 treaties were negotiated. And as many of you know, it led to loss of land, loss of way of life, and loss of culture. So now this little yellow area, that's our current day reservation. And the little chunked out area on the green Wisconsin map, that's actually the Stockbridge-Muncie community. So that's their reservation. That was our last treaty, is we negotiated and gave them 2 parcels. So now I'm going to introduce to you Chief Oshkosh. Chief Oshkosh, he negotiated our treaties that allowed the Menominee to stay on our traditional homelands. And he also taught us our sustainable forest practices. So he said, start with the rising sun and work towards the setting sun, but take only the mature trees, the down trees, and the trees that have fallen. And when you reach the other end of the reservation, turn and come back and your trees will last forever. So we have sustainability is actually written, it was written into our early treaties. So from this wisdom, this is an aerial view taken from a satellite, and you can see here the boundaries of the Menominee Reservation. Our reservation has never been clear cut. And from that, we have ancient garden beds, which Dr. Gartner is going to talk to you more about his research on the Menominee Reservation. So the Menominee were one of the tribes that were selected for termination. A termination greatly impacted the Menominee people. It was yet another way or means to eliminate the Menominee and other indigenous tribes by melding them into the greater population. So in 1953, Congress passed a resolution that would lead to the termination of tribes. 1954, the Menominee were officially terminated and no longer existed as Menominee people. So this led to additional land loss, as well as Menominee Indian tribe overnight became Menominee County. So the land became taxable. Some of the land was sold. They had an idea to make that area into this great northern resort in North Wisconsin. And so you'll see this little yellow picture on the bottom, that's Legend Lake, which is, it took away a lot of our rice spreads. And I was talking to my mother before I came here, and my mother just turned, well, she turned 90. And she said she remembers as a child where there were cranberry bogs, and she would go with her mother and grandma, and they would harvest the cranberries. So through a grassroots organization and the work of many Menominee tribal members, the tribe was restored to the federally recognized status December 22nd, 1973. And many people don't know, but Richard Nixon was the president he was an advocate for Native Americans. And I just recently learned really his role and why he really liked Native Americans. And it's a cool little story, so I'll tell it quick. I'll be fast. So Nixon went to college, and he wanted to play football. And his coach was a Native American. And he was a really bad football player. But his coach really let him play and made him feel like he was important. And so it was that interaction with that coach that really shaped his thoughts, and he became an advocate and was instrumental in deciding to restore the Menominee Indian tribe. So what shaped the Sustainable Development Institute? So the Institute was founded along with the college. So when the community decided that, yes, they were going to start a college on the Menominee Reservation, the community said, we want to have a Sustainable Development Institute. And the reason they wanted it was because of our sustainable forest. And there was such an interest in the work that our foresters do and how it's managed sustainably that there were so many people that were wanting to visit. And they say there were more requests to come and learn and tour the reservation than the loggers weren't getting their work done. So they decided to start the Institute. And we still have a lot of tours. So right after the Institute was developed, again, the community came together. It was a diverse group of individuals. And they developed this Menominee theoretical model of sustainability. So this model is what we use at the Institute and across the college in the work that we do. This model is actually part of our current strategic plan. It's used across the curriculum, and we're actually, our President Caldwell is doing his doctoral thesis on the model. So for us, it's always in the forefront. So the model is based in autochthony, which is in the center. It's actually a Greek word, and it means from this place. And the dimensions, I'm just going to go around. We have on the top is land and sovereignty. Natural resources is the green one. Institutions, technology, economics, and the purple is human perception, activity, and behavior. So the model conceptualizes sustainable development as the process of maintaining balance and reconciling the tensions between the dimensions of sustainability. So each dimension is understood to be dynamic and animate, and it has a relationship with each other dimension. So if you change one dimension, you shift the other dimensions, and that keeping the balance between those dimensions from this place is how we define sustainable development. This model is intergenerational and always evolving. So our focus at the Institute, our research, which I just want to mention our IRBs. We have an IRB at the college, and then so any research that's done through the college comes through us, and it goes through the college's IRB board. And if it's something that the IRB board feels it needs to get bumped up to the tribe, then it's bumped up to the tribe. Then it goes through the language and culture. So our focus areas, climate change, Indigenous people globally. So we have this amazing grant now where we visit other Indigenous communities to see what can be learned and shared. Food sovereignty and sustainable ag, campus sustainability, student enrichment, and social causes. So thank you.
Bonjour, Paho, Poso, that's all I know. So my name is Bill Gartner, and I'm one of the research projects that's come through the Sustainable Institute at the College of the Menominee Nation. And of course, I hit the wrong one here. For the past 10, 12 years, I've been part of the Culture Camp program up on the College of the Menominee Nation, and working with partners and just a whole bunch of different institutions and organizations that are up there. So in terms of the day-to-day, I really want to acknowledge all the participants in the Culture Camp program. So these are high school and college kids, and this is a summer program. And there's a whole bunch of people that are doing a whole bunch of different things. And my very, very small part in this is just simply doing some archaeological excavations, some mapping, some soil sampling and analysis. And the Menominee high school and college kids are, they're the whole thing. They're really the whole thing. So it's absolutely a dream come true for me. And I can't tell you how much I've learned up there. In fact, this is the first research project that I actually look forward to rain. We can't dig the soil in the rain. But in the rain, that means I get to go and sit on the other end of the podium and listen to a whole host of other people share everything that they know about this wonderful, magical place, the Menominee Reservation. It really is a cathedral of a forest. It's just absolutely, it's one of the most beautiful places I've traveled a lot. It's one of the most beautiful places I've ever been. So just a couple of shots. So Rebecca mentioned the treaties, and she mentioned the forestry, and this is really important in the story because of the traditional way of doing forestry on the Menominee Reservation. A lot of the ground surface is intact, and in fact, I've seen soils and fungal networks. I'm thinking about some of Daniel's work and so forth. That there was nothing here at the UW that prepared me to actually see an intact and living soil. And I can't stress enough that a soil is alive. And just as people need diverse foods in order to be healthy, soils also need diverse foods. And part of this story here is that ancestral Menominee peoples, the original organic and sustainable agriculturalists, I don't know if John Greendeer is still here, but our radiocarbon dates out of Menominee are about 100, 200 years earlier than those out of Wisconsin Dells area, so maybe we need to do some more work around Wisconsin Dells, I don't know. But in any event, these are the original sustainable and organic agriculturalists. And I'm here to tell you that the end result of farming was a more fertile soil. And I want to ask you the last time that you heard that phrase in a modern context, that the end result of farming is a more fertile soil, right? And so it's a really remarkable story that I'll share with you very, very quickly. These are some of the sites that we've excavated. I only have time to show you a picture from one, Joe Dick Road, which is up there near the top. Rebecca mentioned the treaties. Of course, everything begins and ends with the treaties. And as part of the treaties, the bureaucrats in Washington basically sent a team to do an agricultural assessment of the Menominee Reservation. I've excerpted a paragraph from there. You can read it on the screen. Basically, this is a terrible and lousy place to do agriculture. The soils are sandy and acidic and nutrient poor. The climate is short. Basically, the terrain is inhospitable. And so on. And I can only imagine what two of the signers of the treaties, Kamanakan and Kanipawe, must have thought of that particular assessment. We've worked on Kanipawe's village, and we've got about 3 square kilometers of gardens and fields and settlement and so forth and so on. So I don't think that this team ever got off the road. I don't think they ever went into the forest. If they had, how could they have missed basically so much. I'm just going to show one image of Joe Dick Road, largely thanks to Jeff Greeno, who is a forester up there, and it plunges through the, oh my God, walking with Jeff in the forest is just amazing. But in any event, we have about 100 acres of these relict fields. And again, the ground surface is intact because of the traditional way that Menominee peoples practice forestry here. So we can map the housing depressions. We've mapped 1,000 storage pits at this particular site. So these storage pits are about 1 to 2 meters in diameter and 1 to 2 meters deep. Mostly they work, so we rarely find food, but occasionally there's one that spoils, and we find nuts and wild rice and maize and sunflower and squash and so forth and so on. So I know it's a weird thing to say that an ancient disaster is good for us today, but anyhow, it's just pretty remarkable. So we stopped mapping at 1,000 storage pits. So 100 acres of fields, 1,000 storage pits. What's really interesting is that it's a dispersed settlement pattern. So instead of the big nucleated village, you get 1, 2, 3, 4 houses that are together. Then you get fields. Then you get some kind of, it's an ecological mosaic. So you're getting different kinds of burning, areas that are not burned, where you have assemblages of trees and so forth. What's important here is that it's possible to provide food for a lot of people, as well as for our non-human relatives, and increase biodiversity at the same time. How do I know that? It's right here on the reservation, and we can dig it, and we can listen to oral traditions and so forth and so on. This is the excavation unit that completely upended my life. This was the excavation unit that made me realize that everything I learned in graduate school was wrong. And this is basically what I was taught was that Native peoples never amended soils. Native peoples did not practice rotational fallow. Native peoples did not do all these other kinds of things. Well, I'm here to tell you that they did, at least in this particular context. So we are on the highest elevation landform in the area. And I don't know how well the colors are showing up here, but there's actually a buried raised field. There's a dark line that's coming down. That's the shoulder slope of a raised field. There's a storage pit. Then there's this other raised field that's built on top, and then there's a storage pit that actually superimposes that as well. And we get a little bit of soil development between the two periods of raised field building. This is about as close to Pompeii as you're going to get in Wisconsin. Marty was talking about poop and why we don't get poop here. It's for a variety of factors. It's humid, but it's also because of 20th and 21st century land use that has just altered things so much. So how do you bury a field system on top of a hill? Anybody? One basket load at a time. And it turns out that these deposits weren't just, they were mixtures of local soils on the hilltop itself, but as we analyzed them, there was all kinds of stuff in them. Wild rice discard. Please, somebody tell me, does wild rice grow on top of a hill? No. We also got fish discard. We also got other kinds of food discard. We got mixtures of charcoal and ash. And from a soil science perspective, we've got an acidic soil. You add ash to an acidic soil, that's going to raise the pH. You have a nutrient poor soil, and that ash is going to add calcium and magnesium and phosphorus and potassium, right? Which is great. You've got the charcoal, which is going to add carbon. But there's a trick here, because if you add too much ash, you kill the living component of the soil. And that's why Daniel's work is just so very, very important in terms of looking at what's happening at the soil roots and the fungi roots and the plant roots. You know, they're all kind of coming together, and they just form this really amazing community. And if you feed the soil just right, you're going to get that suite of microbes that's going to liberate the phosphorus from from the mineral component of the soil. It's going to bring in nitrogen from the air and so forth, but you have to feed the soil. And so we've got all the analyses that show that ancestral Menominee peoples knew how to feed the soil, right? And the end result was a much more fertile thing. And so here are just some excavations. You can see the different mixtures and stuff that were used. We excavate in 5 centimeter levels, and we photograph and we map and we do all that kind of stuff. I'm not going to spend any time on this. Basically, we compare the raised field soils to buried soils as well as nearby control profiles. Phosphorus is very important for plant growth, and you can see we have a lot more, the red and yellow that's above that dash line. That's what's coming out of the field deposits. And so, right, it's a much more fertile soil. God, we need to know this, don't we, today, right? We just so much need to know this. Everything I learned was wrong in graduate school. This is just a summary. So you read that little thing, the assessment of the people that came in, for the treaties. Terrible place to do agriculture. Menominee are not well acquainted with the arts of civilization. A hard phrase, right? And so forth. It's there. So what do we have? We have the oldest raised fields in the mid-continent, radiocarbon dated on the Menominee Reservation. We have soil amendments at different sites. And what's interesting is that each set of soil amendments is tailored to the local environment. There's no one size fits all. And we've got evidence for rotational agroforestry. At Big Eddy West, we have biochar, which is a very special kind of charcoal as well. That's a remarkable history of agronomic achievement, right? And we still have a lot to learn basically from that. But what's more exciting and what's more important is the kinds of things that the Sustainable Development Institute is doing, the Tribal Historic Preservation Museum, Gary Vesall with the food stuff. And that's really what's much more exciting, in my opinion, than what I just presented here. So we built these heritage gardens. I think it's, you can generate numbers all day long. You got to do it to understand it, right? So we built gardens using traditional tools and planting them with the kinds of crops that we've been able to identify. You can see the language component that's built into this. And I was thinking about Dr. Martin's presentation. It's really great to be with someone that knows the language well enough that they can pull together all the syllables that go into a word like squash and gourd. It's so descriptive, not just of the characteristics of the plant, but where they grow, right? And the kinds of associations they have. So very, very important. There's definitely the social component that a couple of people have touched on. We can't dig up everything. And what's fascinating is some of the stuff that is happening at SDI. So Frank and Brandon wanted to do some experiments with, hey, what are they amending the soils with? So they're doing different kinds of combinations that you can see here. And they're taking a look at characteristics of the soil that don't last. They change very, very quickly. pH will change very, very quickly, right? So I don't know what the pH was way back when. What do these amendments do? So that's some of the work that Brandon and Frank are doing at SDI. There's farmers markets, there's seed libraries, right? And it's amazing to see how food has just really exploded, I think, traditional foods that are here. The Menominee Tribal Department of Agriculture and Food Systems has a number of programs that are going, and Daniel's been really instrumental, and Dan Cornelius has been really instrumental in some of this kind of work. But this is really the important thing, right? The important thing when you're on, when you're in Kashena and you get invited and you just share this amazing food, and then you start hearing the stories, and everybody is just, it's that connection, I think, that's just so very important. And that's something that I can never dig up, right? And so that for me has been very, very validating, because I can generate numbers all day long and they just don't mean a damn thing in the absence of what you're seeing up there and people getting together. So why Wenin? Thanks for listening. Bye.
Okay. We have a little bit of time for questions. got a couple of here, and I think if we have any other ones, we might be able to quick squeeze them in. But first question: besides being home to the Great Lakes, what is unique about this region in terms of Indigenous research? Marty, do you want to kick us off on that one?
Sure. Yeah, so I think it's the relations. You know, it's the long historical relationships between the plants and the animals, between the humans and our more than human relatives, between humans and other humans in a pre-colonial context. And then, of course, the relationship between Indigenous people and the colonists. You know, it's those are very unique to what we do here in terms of Indigenous research.
I can just add something. So I think for us, as Menominee, the Great Lakes region, it's the home of our origin story. So we have always lived here in this place. And our origin story takes place in the Menominee River, which is the river that separates Wisconsin from northern Michigan. And it flows into the bay, which is part of the Great Lakes. And so we, have that special relationship with place. And so that's, it's greatly considered before we do any research.
I guess, well, I mean, Wisconsin sits at the boundary between the two great watersheds of North America, the Great Lakes and the Mississippi River. And these were conduits, travel conduits, the highways, really prior to colonization. And so I think about some of the foods that came up here. Maize domesticated in Mexico, of course, but it had to be re-domesticated for very new environments here. And the history of how some of these foods got here and what flowed in the other direction, I think is something that's really quite interesting. The ecological mosaic that's here and the roles of Native peoples in creating that ecological mosaic, I think is also something that's really quite remarkable. So we've got boreal forests on the shores of Lake Superior. We have prairies here to the south, oak openings, just a tremendous diversity of ecological settings. And knowing that Native peoples, along with the climate and the soils and everything else, that it all comes together and can produce such wondrous life forms, I think is really remarkable. There's one spot on the Menominee Reservation where the earthworms haven't gotten to yet, and the fungus that grows there, it's almost like a coral reef in terms of the diversity and the colors and the things that are there. I never knew that nothing prepared me for a soil with that kind of life that's on top of it, or how something as simple as an earthworm can so dramatically change that. So Wisconsin is a place that's full of wondrous stories, and the Native authorship of those stories, I think, is something that's amazing.
Bill, where are earthworms from?
Well, so most of the earthworms that we have here are Eurasian. Basically, they came in with the domesticated animals and some of the old world products. And they displaced some of the soil fauna that was here before. And so the Eurasian earthworm eats like this. So it goes up and down and up and down. And it's great if you're an agriculturalist, don't get me wrong. It's absolutely wonderful. But because it eats going up and down and up and down and up and down like that, it consumes all the fungus, it consumes that organic layer that was on top. And so by consuming that, the soil is different. And if the soil is different, everything else is different. And so if an earthworm can do that kind of change, what are we doing, right? And why are we doing what we are doing? And so this is selfish of me. I want my kids to grow up in a better, more biodiverse world than I do. And unless we can kind of figure out everything that ancestral Menominee, other peoples were doing, we're not going to have that world again, right? So, and I'm selfish, I guess. I want that world,
I'll just add, I think that one of the unique things about the region that inspires our research is really just the variety of indigenous food sources that this region has. It's really varied and unique, and there's so much to relearn about it that there's almost an endless source of new knowledge from old knowledge.
I can just say, I've worked across the region, and it's very interesting to see the differences of Minnesota, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And it's not to say that, you know, it's just all kumbaya and everybody, all our tribes just are, always getting along. But I do feel there's something just here in Wisconsin where I feel like the tribes, there's a little bit more of a spirit of cooperation. And even though there may be differences on issues, it's interesting. And I think there's a lot of different reasons that we could talk about. Marty, I'm sure we can talk quite a bit about just, just within Michigan. And I think a lot of it comes back to history, but I think some of it comes back to geography as well. Our next question, I struggled just a tiny bit on this one because I think it's a little bit, to me, a little bit of a trick question here. What strategies have you used? Well, first, all of you do quite a bit of outreach in different respects, but what strategies have you used to motivate communities to get involved with your work?
I'll answer this one. I don't really think that anything that I do particularly motivates Native communities. I think they're pretty motivated on their own, but it's the support that our organization brings is the tribes have the ideas and we bring the support and the excitement behind the ideas. So whatever it is that tribal communities want to do, we just bring an extra layer of capacity building and support to it.
Mhm. Back in 2010, the food sovereignty movement hadn't really gained a whole lot of steam. There were really about a handful of programs or studies that were going on. And when we would go around to different communities and bring indigenous food, like I literally remember going and bringing my indigenous food to meetings because I knew if we went to meetings, it was all going to be conference and catering from whoever, and it was going to be spaghetti and it was going to be pizza and it was going to be whatever. And when I would bring my indigenous food, people would come over and say, "Hey, what you eating there?" And I'd say, "Well, I'm, eating this indigenous food. It's what I'm trying to do in my life, decolonize." And they're like, "Oh, can I taste that?" Well, it got to be a point where it's like, okay, if I bring in my food, I'm going to have to bring food for everybody because I didn't get much lunch. Anyway, but it didn't take a whole lot to motivate people because I think people are inherently motivated. They're drawn to the food of our ancestors. They know that it's healthy. They want to reconnect. I think it's alive in them. It's the blood memory. The other things that I've been doing, making it part of my curriculum, I have a course I teach, NAS 230, called Decolonizing with Indigenous Foods. Tina and I are working on developing little kids book series that are bilingual, Anishinaabe, focused on food sovereignty. Things like that. Just getting this stuff out there, getting it in front of people, helping them reconnect in good ways.
Yeah, and I guess I interpreted the question a little bit different, says, because I thought of it like, how do I motivate the community that I live within? So how do we, motivate the Menominee people to be involved with our research at the Institute? And one of the things that we're doing now is we're involving the language, because there's so much in our language that tells our story. And so we work with like language and culture. We're incorporating, the Menominee language into the work that we do. And I think that's one way. We definitely go out into the community with each research project that we do. We ask questions. We have elders and youth and community members that that guide our work. So we react to the Menominee community.
I guess I'm lucky because I get to walk into a situation where Rebecca and others have have done so much of that. I guess I would just simply say being there. You got to be there, and you have to help out with whatever you're asked to do, and it doesn't matter whether it's your specialty or not. If someone's kind enough to open up their home to you, then you know, if you're gonna drag saltwater pellets down to the thing, that's what you do. You know, you gotta be there, and something I need to be better at, shutting up and listening. I think is something else. So I guess those are the two things I would say.
I would just add one thing, Dan. You know, Dan often does stuff and doesn't get a whole lot of, thank you. But Dan has started symposiums, summits, forums. You know, a lot of the things that I've attended have this unique mark of Dan behind it. And I don't know if you guys really know a lot about Dan's work, but I think that's really cool. So give him a round of applause.
All comes back to partnership. And, I mean, I give another shout out to Jen in back there of, but Amy Minen, who was here, Jeff Mears, I mean, all of like this work, it's all partnerships. And just my, premise of this question, how do you motivate communities? Communities come and ask for help or partnership. Hey, we need help on something. And that's one of the things that I ask of this university of what is the mechanism for a tribal community or any community to ask for help or ask for partnership? I mean, I think that's one of the things that we need to continue to look at. I know Carla was here earlier, and probably that would be one of the main mechanisms of reaching out to director of tribal relations, but it's building the relationships, because the relationships is what lead to partnerships. But with the work of tribal elder food box and everything else, it's just there's no way that we could have launched in 1 year of effort, really, from the beginning of the first year to the second of this tribal elder food box, reaching all of the communities in Wisconsin without vehicles for transportation, everything else. And I think that's one of the things in general with Indigenous research. I mean, it is those partnerships. Last question for our panel: how can communities build climate change resiliency into our food systems?
I guess I'll take a first stab at that. Cultivar diversity, nurturing your living soils, not trying very keen observations of the local environment, and then adjusting so that you're a good fit for that. So diversity of foods, it's not just diversity of foods. That's diversity of different kinds of maize, for example, or different kinds of sunflower, for example. So having that cultivar diversity, having that overall diversity, having your foods trying to imitate duplicate the way nature does things. So you don't plant nice, neat rows. You have lots of different stuff you have tall plants like maize and sunflower, and shorter plants like beans and squash, different habits. You plant in a way that duplicates the local ecosystem. You incorporate diversity into everything. You feed the soil because it is alive and it needs to eat, but you don't impose your will. You look to what's there and then adjust what you need to what's there, if that makes sense.
I'll say something on this. This has been a really interesting year as far as climate change awareness goes in our communities. It's one of the warmest, driest winters that we've had in northern Wisconsin and Minnesota in recent memory. And we can show a lot of historic data about climate and weather to our students, but I don't think it impacts them in the same way that storytelling does. And so initially, we have a winter camp, week-long activity, community event in Red Cliff, where we demonstrate winter foods, winter, that's where we kick off our sugar bush and demonstrate the different coming out of winter activities that our community would do. This year it was very hard to plan that event because we didn't have any ice on the lake for the first time in a very long time. So we couldn't do ice fishing, we couldn't drop our nets, we couldn't have the dog sleds on the lake. There were just so many things that were different. And at the same time, we were doing a video about winter camp that had some funding through a different organization. And we decided to kind of shift the premise of that winter camp video to interviewing elders who, myself being born in the late 1970s, heard stories from my father who was born in the early 1950s, but he still had the memory of stories from people born in the late 1800s. And so I wanted to get the surviving community members who still had those stories to talk about what winter was like and what activities they were doing and how they were doing them in order to help our young people prepare for the adaptations that they're going to need to make so they could really be aware of how recently things were very different in our community, and to shift their focus to how do we move forward and how do we start to learn how to adapt. And so I guess, yeah, storytelling.
Oh, I can go. My brain was thinking different as you were talking. So I'm older, and sometimes when I hear people ask, like youth, like high school kids, how do you feel about climate change? Have you noticed anything? And I'm thinking, they've only been alive for, under 20 years. Just let them live a half a century and then ask them. But I think one of the ways, or something that we can do is, is talk to the other tribes. I remember when I started working at the Institute, we were working with Robin Kimmerer, and Robin was telling us about a Maple Nation moving, and that as Maple Nation moves further north, everything is going to be shifting. So if we can talk to our relatives from the South to know what foods do they eat, how do they sustain themselves, and share that, I think that's a necessity.
Yeah, I'll just add, listening to my colleagues here talk about what would be good things to think about. I think about our last huge climate change event in Anishinaabe oral tradition. When the big ice sheet broke apart and then let this water come down across North America, across Turtle Island. Nanabuju was there. The primary character representing humans in our traditional teachings was there to witness it. And so that's the story of Turtle Island. That is a climate change story. And that's something that all of our people should know, right? All of these really major events. But also, the fact that our people also lived through probably the second largest climate event, and that's colonization. We've lived through it and we've survived. And so that's really important. The thing that you just talked about, sharing our knowledge with others, I think also sharing the seeds. It's Angela Ferguson, out at Haudenosaunee Food Sovereignty Initiative. As Tina and I went in that corn seed vault, that's beautiful. I mean, we almost cried. I think I did cry. It was just overwhelming. Just to be in there, the feeling is like is like being in a room full of great grandparents. Everyone's great grandparents, and they're like, "We love you." That's what I felt. But getting those out to other tribes, making sure that they're growing the same corn that you're growing. So that way, if something does happen on your reservation, in your community, that it still survives. You still have it somewhere. Someone's doing this. She said that vault is not for seed hoarding. it's for seed sharing. And that's really important. And, so that, those two things are really important. That brings me to the last thing that I would share, and that is we've never in the history of our tribes been contained to one spot. Not taking anything away from Menominee thought about always being in, where you are. But we followed our relatives, the relatives that took care of us, we followed them. They didn't necessarily follow us. So I think the history of migration, the tradition of migration and immigration, I think about Anishinaabe people traveling through Haudenosaunee territory from the Atlantic seaboard to the Great Lakes region. Think about the diplomacy that must have taken and the traditional interrelationships between these people. I mean, that could have been the death of either one, right? But you think about how that shaped who we are today. And imagine if we said, well, you know what, I'm just happy being confined to my reservation. And all of a sudden climate's changing and moving things around. What the heck? We got to stop thinking, like we're colonized. We got to start thinking like our ancestors thought and think about what will we do? How will we work with other tribes and how will we overcome these prisons that they kind of lock our minds in? So miigwech.
Yeah, and just to wrap up, just on this question on this note, I think one of our biggest insurance policies in terms of food, it is the intertribal partnerships. And Marty, it's a good point of just following the rice. Like during rice season, I mean, we're checking people, checking weeks in advance and just knowing where's good. But one of the biggest insurance policies is just that network of tribes. And we could talk a lot more on seeds. I give one more shout out to my first boss when I was in law school, Becky back there. And, I just brought some seeds and Becky's giving me seeds. And I mean, I think our other biggest insurance policy in terms of seeds is having enough growers, growing in different places. And I mean, that's going to be a lot safer than some vault and some wherever the heck it is over in Northern Europe. How are we going to get over there?
Sheltbard.
But I want to thank our panel.